Professor Asiwaju, who I met, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, and who is originally from Nigeria, and who has, in a way, become the father of border studies across the whole of Africa. Anthony Asiwaju has published widely in many areas of border studies, and Big Review has published actually a series of essays on his latest Compendium, which is basically 3 books that he's put together into a single volume, and spans probably about 30 or 40 years of his research, which is extraordinary. He started as a professor in 1969, so before most of you were born. And he's been studying borders ever since, and rose to international fame over the years. So, Anthony, it's an immense pleasure to welcome you today to present your compendium, and I'm extremely grateful that you've made the time. I know it's late where you are, I know it's very late where you are, and I'm extremely grateful that you've taken the time to come and talk to us about your work. And the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I'm with my daughter in Chicago. I came in here came in here originally to attend her daughter's graduation, which took place here on the 17th of May. And so I'm out of my normal environment in my home village in Imeko on the border, in the Nigerian border town on the border with the Republic of Benin. So I'm so glad to be here. And first and foremost, I want to express my appreciation to you, Emmanuel, particularly for responding so well to the initiative I made last year to send you this huge book, almost 1,000 pages. Because when I came and I spoke with Victor Konrad and asked about you, he told me what you are up to since you left as editor of the Journal of Borderlands Studies. And I was excited to know about the big program and the Global Studies program at the University of Victoria, which you have organized. I was very pleased about that. And I was particularly pleased about the Borders in Globalization unit of that program. And that was why I said, if you are doing a work on borders in globalization, I looked at your brochure, I look at this, I look at that, and I said, there must be an opportunity to reflect on the African perspective. Like you know, is my pet project over the years. And I sent you this book, and then you promise you are going to do a review report. Now, I'm familiar with so many learned journals, but I wasn't sure about the idea of a review report. And then you say you are going to, a review report in this journal will be presenting commission reviews by experts on the subject experts in the field, in the subject across the world. And I got a little bit jittery about that. How is this going to be done? How many reviewers? How many reviews? What are they going to say? And I kept on bothering you, and you said you had already commissioned the reviews. And I was glad that Tony Falola in Texas, whose press it was, who published the book, volunteered e-copy to you, which you sent to the various reviewers. I want to thank you most sincerely, because for the first time, this volume, which means my lifetime work, is being placed at global level for review and for discussion. And eventually the reviews came and the review report, and I got a copy of the journal of the Borders in Globalization review of last fall and winter. And I was very excited. Apart from the review report and the constituent review itself, I was enticed by the very journal itself, the layout, the format. And so in appreciating this invitation to talk about my work, I also want to express my appreciation for this innovative way of teaching and researching borders in globalization context. The other thing that I want to be grateful for, Emmanuel, is about the review report itself. I was particularly flattered by the global spread of your selected reviewers. Apart from yourself, another Canadian, Victor Konrad in Carleton, and then 2 Europeans, Soi in Calgary in Italy, Laine in East Finland, in Finland, in the Norwegian country, and then the person I used to call my running mate in border studies, in African border studies, Paul Nugent, yes, who is the head chief. We call the Executive Committee of African Borderlands Research Network Council of Chiefs. And so he is the head chief. All of us on that committee are chiefs. So this spread, and that brought me to look very, very with scrutiny each of the reviews, and I felt gratified. I want to thank you. I want to thank them, because it is this review report and the constituent reviews plus the volume itself that has occasioned this webinar program. I wish to say that the invitation is to talk about the work. And so I want to start talking about the work. And the first thing I want to do, talking about the work, is to reiterate your generous introduction by saying that primarily I am an historian. I'm an historian, and like you have said, I claim it, and gladly too. My pioneer status in comparative African history and borderland studies. That claim raises a number of questions of concept and definition of terms. What, for example, is comparative African history? What is comparative history to start with? What is it for a study to be comparative? What is comparative perspective study? And then borderland studies, comparative borderland. What is comparative? What is borderland studies? What is comparative borderland studies? I thought we should look at this briefly at the beginning. And indeed, the volume itself began grappling with those contested basic concepts. In the very preliminary pagination, the notes about the book and about the author, there is the issue of what is boundary and categorization of boundaries. And boundary in terms of categorization of two main species. Either they are spatial on the ground as on landed property, or as in our own case, in the context of definition of territorial space of modern states, the territorial space of modern states, either externally or internally, spatial boundaries. But boundaries could also be functional. They could be functional, non-territorial, non-spatial, as defined mentalities of race, mentalities of ethnicity, mentalities of culture, particularly the aspect of religion and language, mentalities of gender, mentalities of generation, intergeneration. In other words, boundaries can be expressions of discrimination. Discriminations can be positive. Discriminations can be negative. But whether it is spatial or it is territorial, the issue about boundaries basically is in terms of being definition of relationship. Relationship between we and they, between I and you, between and betweens. And so you find that if boundaries are either spatial or they can be functional or mental. Somebody has defined, for example, walls in the head. Walls in the head. That is mentalities. In fact, the functional boundaries are the most pernicious. And it is when the pernicious aspect of boundary perception is translated to the ground that the boundaries become long wall lines, battle lines drawn between and betwixt groups. So I've made this distinction and I've made this connection again and again. Sometimes experts agree, sometimes they disagree. But for me, there is essential connection, even when we can see the distinctions. So the category we are dealing with in works of border experts is largely spatial, and is largely in relation to definition of territory between national states. Once we deal with conceptual issues, the book then can be talking about, the book can be described in terms of two component sentences. Two. First, they are a reprint of my 3 previously published books. All of them together defining the field of borderland studies. They were out of print for quite a long time, but remain in demand, particularly by graduate students in and around. Particularly in my university and in Africa, in Nigeria, in Africa generally. But my engagements all over the years did not allow me to settle with the issue of reprint. So when I came to do the reprint, I thought that by the time I decided to do this, that was during COVID, there was no point doing them one by one, which itself makes sense. But because by 2019, 2020, those 3 books come out very well as having told a single story, the story of my professional growth as a comparative African borderland studies student, scholar. And since my porter into borderland studies was comparative history, colonial comparative history of cross-border areas in West Africa, and then later in the whole of Africa. I thought that this is also a book, not just of reprint of three out of print books, but also that tell a story that present the the story of a historical, a tradition of historical writing. In other words, a genre, a kind of historiography, and it is the historiography of comparative borderland studies. So that's why the volume Bridging African Boundaries is a reprint. Is a reprint of 3 previously published books, but as well, it is a historiography of African borderland studies. I do hope that I have made myself a little bit, I hope I have not confused you in this definition. The compendium as collection of 3 books, 3 histories, 3 historical accounts, and then the tradition of writing, the history of the writing of those histories, which is historiography in itself. So in a way, the compendium Bridging African Boundaries is as much a reproduction of books as well as the presentation of a historiography, a comparative African borderlands historiography. And as I go on discussing the book, you will see how all this fall in place. After the conceptual issues, the first book, which also defines the first phase in the evolution of this historiography, and therefore in the evolution of self as a professional academic in borderland studies. That first book just fortuitously laid the foundation of the entire career, because I didn't start knowing that I'm starting on a career, on an academic career of comparative borderland studies. No, I started my career purely as an historian, and an historian of one of the finest pioneer schools in African in African historical scholarship, and that is the Ibadan History School. The Ibadan History School is the school of historians of Africa, which was organized by pioneer African historians. That is, historians as historians, but who became aware of the need for a special methodology, special historiography of history of Africans from African perspective. And I was fortunate to be a pioneer set of those who trained in Ibadan, University of Ibadan, which is premier Nigeria university, who first trained in this tradition of African historical scholarship. And the emphasis is, if you are going to look at African history from the perspective of Africa and Africans, then the emphasis should be on sources of history that are internal to Africa, that pertain to Africans. Yes, archives are important. European archives are important, and Arabic archives are important to the extent to which aspects of very many aspects of this history is preserved in European colonial documentation, as well in Arabic cultural documentation. But more importantly, because Africans themselves are non-literate. They are non-literate, but that doesn't make them illiterate. They are non-literate. They have ways of preserving their memory, but it is oral. Most African societies are oral societies. So the technique of using of oral tradition to supplement the archival resources became very, very important for training in history at Ibadan. And it was this Ibadan school that spread later to other parts of the world, including here in North America, in Europe, and so on and so forth. So I trained in that tradition, and at the time I entered the graduate school. The fashion then was to choose a subject for a PhD thesis, which allows for the use of archival resources, the regular archival resources, which in our own case, and in the period emphasized in Ibadan for our training, is colonial archives. Okay, and then oral tradition of the people. So we trained methodologically in this, and because trainees try their hands largely on contemporary era, contemporary history, colonial history. Many who first registered in postgraduate school in Ibadan registered for studies of local responses to British colonial administration, usually generalized as indirect rule system. So there are studies of different zones, different communities, different localities, different local government areas, local colonial provinces of Nigeria. When it came to our own turn, I wanted to do a study too of British colonial rule in my part of Nigeria. That is the Nigerian side of the border. I did French for my undergraduate studies, but my confidence in French was not as good as to encourage me to launch into French colonial archives. But then I was encouraged to do a comparative study. A comparative study that will make my work distinct, that will make my work different from others whose works are on British colonial administrations in Nigerian localities, mostly. And so, since I came from a border area, my professor encouraged me to pick on comparative impact of French and British rule on my ethnic group, which was an African ethnic group split by the Anglo-French border that defined the British Nigerian territory to the east and the French Dahomian territory to the west. My mother, for example, is from a town on the Nigerian side, a place called Imeko. Within the same ethnic group, but my father is from the Benin side of the border, from the Dahomian side of the border, in a place called Ketu. So I grew up in the shadow of a cross-border African locality. But crossing the border by educated people was not common, and interacting with cousins and so on take place, but only at the level of the masses. Education, Western education, British on one side, French on the other side, turned the educated elite, even of the same culture, even of the same indigenous language, back to back rather than face to face. So I was reluctant to take up this challenge, but I was encouraged. I was encouraged because my professor encouraged me. So I launched into postgraduate studies, looking at French and British colonial administrative impact on the Yoruba astride the Nigeria Dahomey, now Benin border in West Africa. And of course, this comparative study, cross-border comparative study, as I said, was not very popular. And so I faced a lot of challenges myself. The first was the issue of brushing up my language, my French language, because in order to bring up to the same level of awareness, the same level of knowledge, of my knowledge of the Nigerian side, to be at par with my knowledge of the Francophone Dahomian side, I needed to brush up my French. I needed to work in the archives in Benin, in Dahomey. I need to work in the archives in Dakar. I need to work in the archives in France. In addition to those of the archives in Anglophone Nigeria and Britain. So that was one hurdle. I crossed it. The other is having to, since this is a work in history. History is a study of the past within the framework of some defined period. Now, comparative study involves two social systems, at least more than one social system. In this case, two colonial systems, French, British, Nigeria for the British, Dahomey, now Benin for the French. The problem that first posed was the problem of chronology. The logic of chronology on one side does not agree with the chronology on the other side. And this study, the thesis I'm to write was in history, not in sociology, not in political science, even though I needed to borrow from the perspectives of these other disciplines. So that posed a major methodological obstacle or challenge. I have to work it out and I have to solve it in my own way. And that was one of the major breakthroughs, the methodological breakthrough of the work, the foundation work. I pursued the chronology up to a point. My first chapter, my second chapter, part of my chapter 3 could be chronologically organized in that we are talking about a pre-colonial setting that is homogeneous, culturally homogeneous, the same people, the same, and then the challenges of the 19th century that dictated the prelude of partition and the imposition of the divergent colonial rules. Also followed sequentially. But beyond that, I couldn't go on with chronology. So I abandoned chronology and decided on themes, on certain selected themes. So if you look at the foundation, book 1 in the compendium, you will see the point that I am making, that after the first 2-3 chapters, I broke into thematic analysis. And so I look at what is the nature of the people's response, because we are looking, I mean, remember the African history is looking at history from below, not history from European perspective. So I needed to use oral tradition to probe the responses and localization of European presence, European colonial presence. One, on the development of chieftaincy institution. 2, the issue of mass response to civil obligations. How burdensome is the one against the other? What is the reaction? Armed resistance, armed rebellion. Where are the incidents of armed rebellion to colonial rule higher than which? And what was the effect of that? That's why I came on this very original issue of migration as revolt, whereby people who get abandoned, who get fed up by colonial rule, colonial regime on the area, migrate en masse from one side of the border to another, taking advantage of the border. And so I found that the incident of armed rebellion was higher on the French colonial side, and less on the British colonial side. And the migration pattern, the protest migration pattern was regularly, constantly, from one side of the border to another. People voting with their foot against the French, against the colonial presence in their midst. Then cultural impact, education, Western education, socio-economic impact, trade, socio-economic impact, agriculture, and so on and so forth. And when I looked at these two systems vis-a-vis each of these counters, thematic counters, it was much clear which one, whether the differences is staggering or the similarities are more. In the meantime, there have been arguments in the literature as to which one is indirect, which one is direct rule, and so on and so forth. My study was the first case study that deal with those controversies. And so the book one in the compendium is what I call the foundation book, where the foundation was laid of cross-border studies, studies of cross-border areas in first of all, between Nigeria and Benin, the Yoruba case study. But, and of course, because it is the first case study, there was a lot of competition for its publication. A lot of competition for its publication. Oxford University Press, Cambridge University Press, and then Ibadan History Series by Longman. Since most of the other studies are in Ibadan History Series, I was glad to leave it in Ibadan History Series. That was how the PhD thesis, the impact of French and British colonial rule on the Yoruba in Nigeria and Dahomey, of 1971, was published in 1976 as European colonial rule, the European colonial rule in Western Yoruba land, case study of French and British colonialism. And it was the first such case study anywhere in the wider empires of both France and Britain. That was why the book of 1971 was so highly received, so well received. In fact, it was one book that was most widely reviewed at the time of the publication in 1976. Okay, but there was the challenge left, and that is how to generalize the methodology and the findings. How to generalize the research methodology and the research findings. And because it was the very first case study of cross-border areas, colonial cross-border areas, I have no opportunity to compare with other such studies, because none of such studies existed. So I decided, in the crave for generalization for wider area, I decided to undertake the follow-up studies myself, all in the 1970s, early 80s, of aspects of colonial rule, such as were covered in the first foundation book, and the result are publications in journals, in symposia publications, symposia books, and so on and so forth. All of them scattered around the learned world. So I decided, encouraged by a book development project of University of Lagos, to do a collection of these scattered follow-up books, follow-up publications into a book of reading. And that is what produced two in the compendium. West Africa West African transformations, a comparative impact of French and British colonialism. You can see the book 2 is a collection of works that follow on the heel of book 2, which was a case study. The book 2 is a West African generalization that allow for West African generalization of the first case study of cross-border people responding to two different colonial regimes. Generalization begets generalization. And so, as I was doing that, it also occurred to me, wait, beyond West Africa, where no question there is this interesting phenomena of cross-border proximities, French, British cross-border proximities. Other areas of Africa too. What happens? So I wanted to, the primary objective of an Africa-wide survey was to do a checklist, first to do a checklist of peoples of Africa who are like the Yoruba, partitioned by European colonial boundaries. The result of that was the project that led to the first Beyond West Africa work on cross-border areas. And that was what led to the very, very famous, if University of Victoria does not have copies of my book, of the book that resulted from that, I will have to ask Emmanuel to query the library. The book I'm talking about is Partitioned Africans. Ethnic relations across Africa's international boundaries, 1884 to 1984. This followed again on the heel of West African transformations. And the project on partitioned Africans and the book on partitioned Africans, as I was completing my work on that, it became clear to me that issue of cross-border people, issue of partition, issue of political partition, issue of imperial partition, colonial, subsequent colonial, divergent colonial rule. It's not a preserve of Africa. I began to have inklings about partition in North America, partition in Asia, partition in South America, and so on. So I decided on a global survey study by taking advice after a lot of consultations, taken advice to go to do a spell of research on the US-Mexico border and cross-border area. I must say that when I took that advice, I took an advice of an opportunity of my life. And I was on the US-Mexico border with a base of sabbatical leave in El Paso, at the University of Texas at El Paso in 1982, 1983. And the result of that, while I was doing that, and I was enjoying it like no man's business, was when I came across an economist, Niall Hansen at University of Texas in Austin, who had just finished a comparative research work on the European borders, Western European borders, cross-border relations, cross-border cooperation, cross-border integration, using the archives of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg to compare, to do a lesson of that for the US-Mexico border. When he has just done a write-up on this project, and I said, wow, I think I must extend the US-Mexico border study to Europe. And that was why I headed for Europe after the sabbatical leave in El Paso to Strasbourg. And that was somewhere 1984, July, August 1984. So this global perspective to cross-border studies, to cross-border comparative studies, was what led to my completely changing the optics, my research optics, from just cross-border studies, colonial history, comparative colonial history of cross-border proximities in Africa. Having done first the case study for foundation study, book 1 in the Compendium, then follow-up that got collected in the book of reading of West African Transformation in 2001, and then partitioned Africans for the whole of Africa. And having gone through the US-Mexico border study and European border studies, it became clear to me that what I was doing was not comparative history. What I was doing was borderland studies. And so the outcome of that were two outcomes. One, my going to El Paso in 1982-83 opened me to the US-Mexico borderland studies community, who are concentrated in El Paso. In fact, the president of African Borderland Studies, the president of Association of Borderland Studies, which began as Association of Borderlands Scholars, was in El Paso, Elvin Stoddard, and his successor, the second president of Association of Borderlands Studies, Oscar Martinez, was also in El Paso. All of them were, most of them are in El Paso. There are others in North Mexico, Southwest America, but the concentration was in El Paso. So my very, very first visit there, when I reached and I told them my interest in comparative studies, easily, automatically, I was admitted into the membership of Association of Borderlands Scholars at that time. And it was the first time I learned of a learned association focused on the issue of borderland studies. Anyway, the rest of that story must be left for another day. So that is the first outcome of finding out globally. Secondly, by the time I returned to University of Lagos, after my exposure to US-Mexico border studies, European border studies, I decided to change the topic of my inaugural lecture, which I had promised to be on colonialism. In fact, the topic I had suggested for University of Lagos was colonialism, I forgot now, but it's on colonialism, patterns of colonialism. And I was going to rage over the issue of colonialism before European colonialism and through European colonialism and up to neocolonialism. That was the kind of thing I wanted to do. But by the time I got exposed to US-Mexico border, European border, I thought I really was not in colonial studies. I was in border studies. I was in borderland studies. In any case, I'll become a licensed member of of Association of Borderland Studies. So the inaugural lecture of 1984, December 12, 1984, was artificial boundaries. And artificial boundaries was delivered at a time in Nigeria of one of the worst military juntas that Nigeria has ever known, or even Africa has ever known. And so the flyer went out. A lecture was going to be given, public lecture in University of Lagos, close to Dodam Barracks, the seat of the military junta in Ikoyi, and that it is going to be on artificial boundaries. What is that? And so intelligence flew into University of Lagos campus to find out, to get a copy, an advanced copy of the lecture. Now, I was approached. Those who came from the military junta first went to the office of the Vice Chancellor, and the Vice Chancellor directed them to me. This was the Monday before the Wednesday, 12th of December, 1984, when I was to give the lecture. And they came. They wanted to have an advanced copy of the lecture. I said, I haven't actually finished writing. So I took them to my typist, who was still, in truth, still busy typing, correcting my draft. And I said, have you finished? He said, no, sir. How far? I've gone halfway, sir. So the fellows who came from the junta were with me, 2 of them. I said, you can hear. You see, even if they are finished, I'm not sure whether what you will have taken away now will be what I will precisely pronounce on Wednesday. It was just 2 days away. If you can come back on Wednesday, I will give you the original copy of the lecture that I was going to give, that I will have given, and you can go away with that. They said, one looked at the other, and the other looked at the other, and then they say, okay, yeah, we can live with that. We will come back on Wednesday. So they left. And I kept just doing my work innocently. And on Wednesday, it was like the day that the Lord has made. It was packed full because that was the time we were in the heat of the first indefinite unilateral border closure by Nigeria against all our neighbors. So anything border touches too sensitively on policy. So it was, when we watched the video later, it was full of foreign missions, intelligence, community, security, community, defense, and it was well applauded, very, very well received. So as I came down the podium and was filing out after the lecture, having been photographed with the principal officers of the university as it is in our tradition, I looked at the crowd before me and I saw the 2 people who had come to meet 2 days before. And I signaled to them, I will give you, I've seen you. So after we finished, I called my faculty officer, look, go and photocopy this lecture. It was not day of Xerox, it was not day of Xeroxing machine. And so I gave him the lecture. The lecture, he took the lecture. I said, look, do the photocopy. Keep the photocopy for me. Give the original to this gentleman. So they left. And the university was agog about congratulating me about the great lecture. It's never been like this, and so on and so forth. Even on the day, the 2 days after, on Friday, when I was in my office, colleagues were still around me, were still talking about the lecture and so on, because papers carried it. Then 2 people came, soldiers this time, from the junta, from the military junta, saying, may we know who is Professor Asiwaju here? And I said, it's me. And I said, well, we are here. The head of state would like to see you for a chat. At that time, in Nigeria, in University of Lagos, to be invited for a chat at the Rodan Barracks in the military junta court is to get ready for at the very, very best military detention. And so before I say Emmanuel, all the colleagues who gathered around me had disappeared. And I was left alone. So I said, okay, I just want to make 2 requests. Am I going with you in your car, or I can come with you in my official car? Oh, you can come with you in your official car, sir. I said, okay, thank you for that. Secondly, can we pass through my house before we drive out of the university campus? He said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. I said, because I just wanted to let my wife know. So we drove, I in my car, they following me to my house. And I told my wife, who incidentally is Victoria of late memory. So when every time I think of University of Victoria, I said, there is a university in the name of my wife. So, and I got in, I said, look, Victoria, I'm invited to see the head of state in Dodan Barracks. Oh, she raised the row. I said, this is going to be trouble. Oh, I have to go with you. I said, no, you can't go with me. They didn't invite you. Just stay home. But give me my traveling kit, where I usually pack my things, face towel, toiletries, toothpick, toothbrush, toothpaste. So he gave me so I said, bye-bye, I'll see you by the grace of God. So we headed for Dodan Barracks. Now, what was widely feared to be an invitation to military detention turned out to be a red carpet reception. Okay. A red carpet reception. I couldn't see the head of state himself, but I saw his second in command, who at that time was more dreaded than the head of state himself. But he welcomed me very, very nicely, very, very nicely. We have gone through your lecture line by line, and we saw that your argument is infallible. We are convinced by your argument that we were trying to close something that has no lock. We don't know the border, and so on and so forth. So the head of state will agree to receive you personally. But unfortunately, after the messengers left for you, we discovered that today is also the day for receiving credentials of newly posted ambassadors. So he drew the curtain across his window and said, that is his office there. There, all those cars you saw there are cars of diplomatic missions. So that's why he couldn't, but he has asked me to receive you. And but the question is, I breathed some sigh. He said, "What is the matter?" I said, "Well, no, not in reality, sir." So I said, "Okay, you concluded that if you have money, you will organize more research, and most of us thought that what more research is there to be done, given this vast field, ground that you have covered in your inaugural lecture." But the head of state said, look, let's see the man. He will have something up his sleeves. And when we have seen him, we will know. But because I cannot receive him personally, since he has a research proposal in mind, assure him that this government is prepared to fund further research, and that he has for now approved a sum of 5 million naira for the research proposal, whatever it is that I was going to make. So I then felt relaxed. I said, thank you very much, sir. So anyway, the rest is story. That was how I got the inaugural lecture, got me catapulted from my cocoon as an academic in the University of Lagos into policy arena for the whole of Africa, beginning with Nigeria vis-a-vis strategic limitrough neighbors in West Africa and Central Africa. So stage 2 of the stage 2 of my professional growth, and marked by book 2 up to partitioned Africans and artificial boundaries, did more than just expanding basis of data and interpretation and analysis, but also moved me from academia of border studies into policy practice, border policy practice. And so book three in the compendium is what I call stage 3, which arose directly from all the studies in book 3 of the compendium, are publications arising from this policy involvement, my direct policy involvement, and studies, because my academic productivity did not stop with appointment into public office. In fact, public office, to the extent to which it is so cognate to the academic expertise that I've built up, was an advantage for furthering research. So all the works, the details, the content of book 3 are products of academic products, academic research products, academic and policy research products of phase 3 of my professional growth. So the book 3 brings us to the totality of the 3 books in the compendium. But there are supplementations in the compendium that has to do with the issue directly of African borderlands historiography. And that's exactly what is done in the prologue of the compendium, which is about 25 pages. And then there is the projection for the future, institutional building, capacity building, and so on and so forth, which is in the epilogue of another 3 or 4 pages. So the forward, which was generously provided by General Obasanjo, former Nigerian head of state, and one of the still well-acclaimed African statesmen. That forward, about 6 pages, is so pleasing as direct witnessing of some of a policymaker that I take as representative of all the policymakers that have tasted out of my academic productivity for the purpose of policymaking on border governance, cross-border cooperation, and regional integration. And that is why that forward is a direct witnessing to the successful supplementary policy advocacy work that go with my academic research and productivity, all of which are contained in the compendium. So I'm sorry I've taken this long to present the work, but that is it. I want to thank all of you for listening to me, and particularly to Emmanuel, who has been a long-term associate in Borderlands studies. Thank you very much for your attention.